Hey everyone, this is James from Sweetfish, and this is an incredibly special episode for our team. This is episode 1000. It sounds weird to even say that out loud. Our team has spent the last 3.5 years pouring an enormous amount of energy into this show, and to say that it's been worth it would be the understatement of the century. On the back of this podcast, our young business has done 7 figures in revenue, and we're on pace to becoming one of the fastest growing private companies in the US. The show was downloaded over 145,000 times last month alone. It's been ranked as a top 100 podcast in the business category of iTunes, and it's been listed in Forbes as the #1 podcast for B2B entrepreneurs. But the fancy accolades and the big audience aren't what I get excited about. I get excited about the 1,000 relationships that these episodes represent. This podcast has allowed us to create these incredibly strategic relationships with decision makers that could potentially become our customers, while simultaneously allowing us to create content that the rest of our market wants to hear. This podcast has quite literally changed my life. Ryan, our director of customer experience, had a brilliant idea to do something special for episode 1000, and we decided to do it. We asked individuals from our team to share a specific podcast episode or story about podcasting that's made a powerful impact on their lives. I had a really hard time zeroing in on just one podcast episode that's impacted my life. Pretty much every episode from the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast is powerful. The Faith Driven Entrepreneur Podcast has filled up my soul on several occasions. The Build a Better Agency podcast with Drew McClellan has transformed the way I run my business. But the specific episode I want to share here is actually one that I just listened to a few days ago. It's an episode from a podcast that we produce for one of our customers, BombBomb. And the show is called the Customer Experience Podcast. In episode 15, Ethan Butte, the host of the show, talks with Joey Coleman, the author of Never Lose a Customer Again. The interview focuses on the importance of the first 100 days of your customer's experience with your business. I actually read Joey's book last year and did an entire solo episode about what I learned from it. It's episode 711 if you want to go back and listen to it. But Ethan uncovered some things with Joey that I didn't get from reading the book. Here are 2 really powerful takeaways that I walked away with after listening to Ethan's episode. They talked about how most companies are so focused on acquiring new business because most executives rise to leadership from sales or marketing roles, not account management. But if we had more executives with an account management background, companies would likely be pursuing growth in a much more efficient and cost-effective way. They'd be growing through retaining existing customers and creating lifelong relationships with the people that are already buying from them. So as I continue to build the leadership team at Sweetfish, this is going to be something I think a lot about. If I just stack our leadership team with sales and marketing people, the chances are good that we'll end up overemphasizing growth through new business and underemphasizing a proven growth channel that's a lot more efficient, customer retention. My second takeaway from this episode was that if we want our employees to create exceptional experiences for our customers, then we as entrepreneurs and leaders of teams need to show them what an exceptional experience looks like. We need to create amazing experiences for our employees. This is something we're starting to do at Sweetfish, but we still have a lot of work to do here. And this takeaway was a much needed kick in the pants for me. All right, enough for me. Now I'll kick it over to our team.
Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Droddy. I am the Director of Customer Experience here at Sweetfish. And I want to share with you a couple of quotes that I heard from podcasts today. I'm not typically a quote kind of person. I don't live my life by pithy statements, but these 2 have honestly changed the way I live. And so that should tell you that they're powerful. The first comes from, now I heard both of these on podcasts. I don't know if I mentioned that, but the first one comes from the podcast, The Chief Customer Officer Duct Tape Show, long title, but it was an interview with Jay Baer. And as a director of customer experience, this hit home big time. It was almost all great customer experience comes from a position that the customer is smart enough to tell the difference. That is so powerful to me. I'll just let that sink in. And then the other one Honestly, I don't know where this came from. I am, outside of work, a creative writer, trying to be a novelist. And so I don't know where this came from. I listened to a podcast called Helping Writers Become Authors, which, if any of you are creative writers, I highly recommend that one. This may have come from there, maybe not, but it's a Neil Gaiman quote that has changed my life as a writer more than anything else. And I don't know where I heard it from, but it was from a podcast. So I know that for a fact. So the point is, this information was disseminated to me through a podcast, which shows the power of the medium. But it's this. He says, start telling the stories that only you can tell, because there will always be better writers than you, and there will always be smarter writers than you. There will always be people who are much better at doing this or doing that, but you are the only you. There are better writers than me out there. There are smarter writers. There are people who can plot better. There are all those kinds of things, but there's nobody who can write a Neil Gaiman story like I can. And that can sound fluffy a little bit, I would say, but I think it's so powerful when we tend to compare ourselves to anyone else in any type of industry, any type of work that we're doing. I think keeping that in mind is so important. Whatever work you're doing, there is 100% nobody who can put their spin on it the way that you do. And so you don't have to stack yourself up to the level of accomplishment that others accomplish. And you can judge yourself by your own standards. So I'll leave you with that.
Hey everyone, this is Andrew Hurley. I am the Director of Operations here at Sweetfish. And the first podcast lesson that comes to mind for me is from an episode from Bill Simmons' podcast, where he interviewed Scott Harrison, who is the CEO of Charity Water. So, Charity Water is an organization that basically exists to help end the water crisis. So, there's a lot of people, specifically in Africa and South America and parts of Asia as well, that don't have access to clean water. And so, what Charity Water does is they go into these areas and they help drill wells for people that need clean water, because many times it's just a few 100 feet below where they're standing, and they just can't get access to it. So, what I learned during this interview, it was just Scott's story of how he came to found Charity Water and how he turned his life around. So, I'd say the lesson I've learned here is that nobody is beyond redemption. It's never too late for anybody to turn their life around. Scott was a nightclub promoter for many years in New York City, had some drug and alcohol problems, and just was not very satisfied with his life. And then he completely turned his life around and founded Charity Water and has helped impact the lives of millions and millions of people. So it's a very impactful episode that I would definitely recommend to anybody looking to hear an inspirational story. Also, Scott wrote a book that came out in October. It's called Thirst. So you can find that by looking up Charity Water or the book Thirst by Scott Harrison. Huge recommendation, but that podcast episode absolutely changed my life and changed the way that I view the water crisis, how I view charities in general, how they should operate from a place of positivity and transparency and showing where every single dollar goes. And then I think most important of all, that nobody is beyond redemption and absolutely changing their life and helping people out in any way that they can.
Hi, this is Alexis Germany, the podcast talent manager for Sweetfish Media. My favorite lesson that I've learned from a podcast comes from the Mortified podcast. They end each episode with the tagline, "We are freaks, we are fragile, and we all survived." And what I've learned from listening to this podcast is that when you have one of those moments where you've embarrassed yourself or you're feeling like an oddball, it's important to take a breath, remember that literally every other human has had that similar experience, laugh it off, and move on.
Hello, my name is Allison. I'm an account manager at Sweetfish Media. An episode that I've recently listened to that's really stuck with me is episode with Brandon Stanton on the Tim Ferriss Show. Brandon is the creator of Humans of New York and tells personal stories from people all over the world. And I just really enjoyed listening to his stories and how he has been able to impact people all over the world in such a positive way. And it just goes to show that you can have an impact in what you do if you stay focused on your mission and your values. So that's been one of my favorites.
My name is Isabel Marsh, and I'm a senior account manager at Sweetfish Media. I wanted to share one of my favorite podcast episodes from a show called Inclusion Works. And it's actually a show that we produce here at Sweetfish. And one reason why I love this podcast as a whole is because it takes such a unique perspective on everyday issues. And in particular, I was recently listening to episode 7, where Yari Blanco was a guest. And she is the Senior Manager of Culture and Diversity at The Wing, which is a network of community spaces designed for women. And in this episode, she encourages people of power to actually use their privilege and pass the mic to people who need somebody to back them up. And I think this is such an important and crucial message that we can send to people in the workforce right now and people who are looking to have their voice heard in their community, in their company, in their culture. And I particularly like how she encourages someone of power to go to someone who may need that mic passed to them and say, hey, you said something really valuable. I'd love for you to speak up and share your thoughts a little bit more clearly for the rest of the group. And I think that's such an important message that we should continue to spread throughout our communities.
Hi, my name is Ralph Miranda, and I'm an account manager with Sweetfish Media. I've been an account manager for about 3 months now, and I love listening to podcasts. In fact, my son and I do a podcast called the Press Box Podcast. It's a sports podcast. We talk about professional sports, college sports, pretty much any sport. And we've had quite a few guests on our podcast. And one of the things that I learned, one of the lessons I learned real quickly, I think I already knew it, but it was kind of reinforced, was that people genuinely love to talk about themselves, what they do, and what they know. And if you get them on a podcast and you start engaging them, they're more than happy to discuss what they've done, what they're achieving, what they have achieved, and what they know and what they like to talk about. But the beauty of it is that you develop relationships with those people. And my son and I have developed relationships with guests that we've had on the podcast that started about 2 years ago, and those relationships are ongoing today. So I guess overall, the best thing about podcasts is that not only can you learn some important information from them, but you develop strong relationships with the people that you have on as your guests. And that's why I think podcasts are so important, not only to the general public, but to the business world as well. I enjoy my role as an account manager. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy working with people. And I enjoy producing these podcasts. And that's why I want to say congratulations to Sweetfish Media for their 1000th episode of the B2B Growth Show.
Hey guys, Logan Lyles here. You may know me as one of the regular co-hosts here on B2B Growth. I'm also the director of partnerships here at Sweetfish Media. So since last July, I've been in charge of new customer partnerships as well as agency and referral partnerships for our podcast agency here at Sweetfish. I've been building and growing our sales team for the agency. So that's a little bit about what I'm up to. My podcast story or lesson that I want to share with you guys comes from one of my favorites. Now, I listen to a lot of podcasts, especially a lot of sales and marketing podcasts, some of those from our customers, some not. Wanted to take a second to give a couple of shout outs there in the marketing space too that I follow regularly are Flip My Funnel and Seeking Wisdom from Terminus and Drift, respectively. In the sales space, one that I regularly listen to is Make It Happen Mondays with John Barros. And in the leadership segment, the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast is always in my rotation. But my lesson today comes from the Building a Story Brand podcast with Donald Miller, which is another one of my weekly favorites. Recently on that show, he had a gentleman on the podcast by the name of Ian Morgan Cron. Now, Ian is a speaker and author. He's written a book called The Road Back to You. And regularly, he is speaking on the Enneagram, which if you aren't familiar with the Enneagram, that's ENNEAGRAM. Google it. You will find all sorts of stuff around the Enneagram. It is an ancient personality typing system that focuses on the 9 core personality types that exist in the world, how they relate to each other, and how they view and relate to the world. And I've done personality tests like the Myers-Briggs, DISC profile indicators, those sorts of things. I've never found a personality typing system or assessment tool that I have
resonated with my results as much as the Enneagram. And I know a number of members of the team and my family actually would echo the very same thoughts about the Enneagram. So Donald Miller was interviewing Ian Morgan Cron, and the title of that episode was The Do's and Don'ts of Leading Each Enneagram Type. And as I mentioned, with the Enneagram framework, it speaks to the 9 primary personality types that exist in this system and really laid out the do's and don'ts of leading people of each personality type. And I just thought it was very, very practical advice, especially if you've recently taken the Enneagram assessment. If you Google Enneagram Institute, there is an assessment that you can take. I think it's like $7 or something, but it is definitely well worth it to take a look at where you fall on that scale and talk with your significant other, your coworkers, your friends about. It is just fascinating stuff. So this episode introduced me to the Enneagram. And since then, like a lot of people who have been diving into some content in and around Enneagram personality types lately, I've just not been able to get enough of it. So the Building a Story Brand podcast is one in my regular rotation. I regularly get some great tips on just productivity, marketing, messaging, and sales from that podcast. But this one, in kind of a different episode, introduced me to some of the content from Ian Morgan Cron. I since have read his book, The Road Back to You, and been diving into more regular content in and around the Enneagram. And I just find it very fascinating and valuable stuff. So I would suggest, if that's not on your radar, check that out. Definitely go subscribe to Building a Story Brand with Donald Miller, one of my favorite podcasts.
Hi there, sweet fish. I'm Z from the House of Audio Z people behind the big wall, the last one of the Southeast Audio Kingdom, Lord of Audio Restoration, Protector of Post-Production. Working so long on this show, I heard a lot of things, so in the end, I had to learn, then to unlearn, and then to relearn some things again. Those 1,000 episodes were actually 1 hot minute for me, a blink of an eye. We are one big mob and nothing is the same. So we keep moving. Sweet fish, keep on swimming.
All right, this is James again, and I hope you enjoyed hearing from our team. Thank you so much for being such a huge part of this journey to 1,000 episodes. Here's to 1,000 more.